Missing some exuberant jollies or frolics from the Nietzschean mule here. Um, this the yes saying to life, appears in a strange light in Heidegger. One can superimpose Nietzsche's thoughts apparently quite readily onto Heidegger's. Maybe that's not surprising because most systems of thought can more or less be superimposed upon one another, and then some slight variation shows, perhaps makes all the difference. So when Heidegger insists that truth is the aletheia, it seems that from the ordinary perspective, what he says is truth. Truth is discovery. So truth is discovery rather than primarily invention. Invention is somehow derivative. Truth is discovery. So Nietzsche says here against that truth is creation. Truth is creation. But Heidegger won't allow the view that truth is straightforwardly discovery. So say you're thinking in terms of a claim by a physicist concerning the measurement of some entropic system, even extending back to the furthest point where we can make measurements which is actually a point that's available to us. We should never forget, which when we speak of a 14 billion plus year old explosion, if that's what it should be called, we speak of a measurement which some Dasein would have to carry out, just as we look at a clock and see the second minute that another Dasein can see, therefore bring it into presence. Some Dasein would have to carry out a measurement on a present phenomenon, which if dealt with, measured properly, we could call a scientific fact, and derive from that, from the so-called heat event, which is still present in the this redshift phenomenon. I believe that's how we should understand it. But in any case, they derive from something available to a Dasein this notion of the 14 billion years. So we shouldn't forget that. But that's not the main point here. From their point of view, they're dealing with discovery straightforwardly, right? There's no second move to ask about the background in their thinking that allows them to talk this way about discoveries and ultimately about truth. What's the status of... So is there a special truth for physics, for instance? And does that mean that that kind of truth is on analogy with truth itself? And then what is truth for, and so on? The Socratic questions could arise. Here, Heidegger can agree with everything that's happening in the view of the physicist, except he points out that there's some Dasein which is making the discovery, and that Dasein is thereby, in grasping the object, in correctly objectively describing it, they're the kind of being for whom it's right and proper to talk about correct descriptions, to talk about discovery, and to talk about what is the same discovery for that physicist is simply truth. There's no need for an extra word. But if you say if you think about it as, if you draw back into a reflection on what's happening, then you have to pose this question about what kind of truth, where does the idea of truth come from, and so forth. And this question brings us into a region that begins to look very Nietzschean, in the sense that it seems right to say genuinely, since only a Dasein, according to Heidegger, can have this understanding of truth, a specific understanding of truth as uncovering like this, all this could be the same, he says. They could all go its shadowy way, even if there were no Dasein, but it wouldn't be truth. Truth is a specific way of understanding what's happening, and what's happening is actually this action of discovery or disclosure, and that this is all, Heidegger suggests a specific interpretation of truth. Clearly, there's talk of truth, of theology, for instance, truth in the case of and mathematical truths, for that matter. So the physicist has to somehow say, no, this is the real stuff. This was all we're ever talking about. There's no, and even in many cases to deny that the word truth has any sense, because they, as it were, no longer reflect on their own being in language. They withdraw from the staking themselves on language and try to make themselves, as it were, animals who have a language but use that language. There's some, I should say, this notion that the human being is that being which stakes its nature, or that is to say, what kind of thing it is. Not a tree, not a snake, but a being which is asking the question what kind of being it is. This idea of staking one's nature on language, that way of stating it is, I owe to Agamben, and there's something stirring in it. I think that's a very strong way of putting it. So this brings in another dimension. How so far is there an escape from language? So I think Agamben is doing this Heideggerian project, which I was mentioning before, calling it questioning, thinking. We had two terms, but let's call it questioning rather than philosophy or thinking. If questioning is this attempt to get free of language in order to see things clearly, it would neither mean going back to the physicist and the animal which have language but basically use it for doing things that they already presuppose, but it would mean somehow to sense a position which is aware of this moment where language becomes totally determinate of what kind of being we are, and flows into everything. So what language means exactly there is not straightforwardly clear. But in any case, in something like this region, it seems like this is the questioner problem in Heidegger. If Agamben calls this in one of his books infantilism, or the position of the infant, something like that. Pre-voice, I suppose. Rather, they have ability to make noise, but not to speak properly. In Nietzsche, I suppose Heidegger is saying the Gelassenheit, the letting be, says we can't interpret this according to a life-giving lie. We can't insist that the physicist, in being the most authoritative beings alive, who draw back from philosophy as mere talk and turn talk into a mere tool, according to Nietzsche, would be exercising this will to power, this life-giving lie, which is to say, in contradistinction to the eros that goes to the truth or to science proper. So the scientists think they have this, in a way, a will to discover truth, but since it's not really the truth, we call that will to power instead. They just sort of seek power by having the most authoritative view and promulgating it with the logos about what it all is about. So it seems in the Gelassenheit saints that we can't say, no, this is will to power or will to truth, but now we have to try to just let be and not even, we could look at our opinions about that question, but we wouldn't regard them as anything but more sort of scintillations from that light bulb hitting our methodos, our path in investigation.